Hey everyone, Shark here, bringing you a guide on Xingqiu, one of the best characters in all of Genshin Impact that's only gotten better with time. If you've managed to get a copy of this wet book nerd, consider yourself lucky, as he really unlocks the power of countless other characters and is a staple on over half the teams in the game. This video will cover his skills, abilities, constellations, and how he works, and then we'll go over the best ways to build him, including his calculated best weapons, artifacts, as well as stat priorities. We'll finish with his strengths and weaknesses and his best teammates. If you like this guide, or if it helped you, let me know by placing your fin on that like button and subbing to the channel. And if you have a specific character you would like a guide on, let me know in the comments. So let's begin this guide by going over Xingqiu's kit and the surprising ways in which he works. Xingqiu is a 4-star Hydro Sword user that is honestly as powerful as a 5-star character, especially with certain constellations. His incredible game-defining power comes from his ability to consistently apply Hydro, which is one of the most valuable elements in the game for elemental reactions. But beyond his great Hydro application through his elemental burst, he also works off-field, providing a significant source of damage while he's not even the active character. And he is also an incredible partner for some very strong hypercarries like Hu Tao. All of these strengths on their own are enough to make Xingqiu a top-tier character, but he also has access to healing, damage reduction, interruption resistance, and other utilities, making him a total support package and cementing his role as one of Genshin Impact's best, most versatile characters. Xingqiu's normal attacks are a 5-hit sequence that are frankly very mediocre. They do not have high talent scaling and do minimal damage. However, you may want to use his normal attacks to trigger weapon passives like the Favonius swords. Xingqiu's skill, Gua Sword Fatal Rain Screen, is a double-hitting ability that generates 5 Hydro Energy particles and has a massive 21-second cooldown. This ability can hit pretty hard and provides Xingqiu with 3 Rain Swords. These Rain Swords can last up to 15 seconds and have 4 important elemental properties, which we'll go over now. Property number 1. When the Rain Swords are summoned, they surround the active character, even after Xingqiu switches out, and the Rain Swords reduce the damage the active character receives. Increasing Xingqiu's skill talent level and Hydro damage bonus increases the amount of damage the Rain Swords can reduce before they break or disappear, up to a 24% damage reduction. This is perfect since increasing his skill talent level and giving him a Hydro damage bonus goblet will therefore increase his offensive and defensive capabilities. The second property of the Rain Swords unlocks with Xingqiu's first Ascension passive. Once you ascend Xingqiu past level 20 and unlock this passive, the Rain Swords that surround your character will provide healing to the active character when they break or disappear after 15 seconds. Each Rain Sword heals the active character by 6% of Xingqiu's max HP when they break or disappear, amounting to a total healing of 18% of the Water Sword Boy's max HP to the active character. Xingqiu's first constellation gives him an extra Rain Sword, meaning that once you unlock this passive, the healing increases to 24% of his max HP to the active character. The third property of these Rain Swords is they give the on-field character interruption resistance. This can help the on-field character not get knocked around as easily, and it's really nice as a quality of life and gameplay buff. Instead of you getting hit and interrupted out of your attacks, the Rain Swords will take the hit for you, reduce the damage you take, and then heal you before they disappear. The fourth and final property of the Rain Swords is that they immediately apply Hydro to Xingqiu after he uses his elemental skill, which is nice for removing a debuff like Smoldering Flames, but more often than not it's a hindrance, accidentally stunning or freezing you if enemies are attacking you with Electro or Cryo. But there's a little trick you can do that will make this property of the Rain Swords really work to your advantage. After the Rain Swords initially apply Hydro to you, they keep applying Hydro to anything they come into contact with, except you. This means that as long as the Rain Swords are orbiting you, you can hug enemies and get an extra proc of Hydro application about once every 2 seconds, and that is really helpful for a lot of elemental reactions. I know we're barely into Xingqiu's kit and it's already quite a lot, so let me sum it up for you. Xingqiu's elemental skill hits pretty hard, it generates a good amount of hydro energy particles, and it has a long cooldown. His skill also produces rain swords that let Xingqiu provide 3 powerful defensive utility buffs: damage reduction, interruption resistance, and a moderate amount of healing. While Xingqiu's defensive utility is extremely useful, it's his offensive capabilities that put him over the top, and that's all thanks to his elemental burst. Xingqiu's elemental burst, Gua Sword Rain Cutter, is where a majority of his damage and hydro application comes from. It has a 15-second duration and a 20-second cooldown, and it costs 80 energy. The elemental burst summons rain swords just like the elemental skill, and additionally it launches these rain swords at an opponent when the active character triggers a normal attack animation. Note that the description says that these summoned swords attack when a character uses a normal attack. However, the normal attack does not have to deal damage or even hit an enemy in order for these summoned sword attacks to be triggered. And they also work when Hu Tao uses a charge attack or in Raiden's elemental burst, which are not considered normal attacks. This is just another example of Genshin's descriptions not being reliable, but it's to our benefit, so we'll take it. Unlike the elemental skill, the rain swords summoned by the elemental burst will remain at maximum until the elemental burst ends, allowing you to receive the benefits of the damage reduction and interruption resistance, but not the healing until the burst is over. A quick note about Xingqiu's elemental burst, it does not snapshot buffs. This means that any buffs obtained after using his elemental burst will not be able to be extended past their normal duration like you can do with Xiangling or Beto's elemental bursts. As you're building your Xingqiu, you'll want to level up his elemental burst first, then his skill and his normal attacks do not need to be leveled. Next, we move on to Xingqiu's passives, which are much less complicated than his elemental skill and burst. His first ascension passive makes the rain swords summoned by his skill or burst heal the active character whenever they are broken or disappear. In the case of the elemental burst, only when they disappear. The healing is 6% of Xingqiu's max HP per sword to the active character, so he can heal for a total of 18% of his total health at Constellation 0, or 24% of his maximum health at Constellation 1. This is an overall quality of life passive, but nothing too major. His final ascension passive unlocks after you ascend him past level 60 and gives him an additional 20% hydro damage bonus. This not only allows him to deal more damage, but it also increases the damage reduction buff his rain swords provide. Xingqiu's utility passive gives you a 25% chance to refund a portion of the character talent materials when you select Xingqiu to craft them at the alchemy table. It's one of the better utility passives, as he can save you a bit of farming on character talent materials. Next, we move on to Constellations, and Xingqiu has some of the best constellations for a 4-star character in the entire game. His first constellation increases the maximum number of rain swords he summons from 3 to 4. This increases the healing and damage reduction he can provide, but it does not increase his burst damage or hydro application. It's really the least impressive of Xingqiu's constellations, but it's far from the worst 4-star constellation out there. Xingqiu's second constellation is his second best overall. It increases his elemental burst duration by 3 seconds, making it have an 18-second duration with a 20-second cooldown. The increased duration also brings better hydro application, and it increases the total number of rain swords he can fire off from 37 to 45. The second effect of this constellation is that it decreases the enemy's hydro resistance by 15% for 4 seconds after the elemental burst hits them. Note that this hydro resistance shred will benefit the entire team, allowing other hydro characters to deal more damage as well. This constellation is an overall 28% increase in damage from C0 and C1 Xingqiu. His third constellation increases his elemental burst level by 3. This is great since Xingqiu's elemental burst is his largest source of damage. This constellation is a 15% increase in damage from his Constellation 2 and an overall 48% increase from Xingqiu at Constellation 0. His 4th constellation increases the damage of his elemental skill by 50% if you use it after using his elemental burst. This can make his skill hit extremely hard, and it can be quite nice with a sacrificial sword, as we'll discuss in the weapon section later. However, this constellation does not force Xingqiu to use his elemental skill after his burst, and that's a good thing since it's more important that he catch the hydro particles that he generates from his elemental skill. Xingqiu's Constellation 4 provides a 6% increase in damage over his Constellation 3, but practically it's a 0% increase in damage a lot of the time because you really want to use Xingqiu's skill before you use his elemental burst. Using Xingqiu's elemental skill just before using his elemental burst will allow you to catch the hydro particles on Xingqiu during the initial animation of his elemental burst. This is extremely helpful because Xingqiu has very high energy requirements, and using his skill just before using his elemental burst maximizes the energy he gains, which is worth taking a small DPS loss by not taking advantage of his 4th constellation. Xingqiu's 5th constellation increases his skill talent level by 3. It's nice, but only a small portion of Xingqiu's overall damage actually comes from his elemental skill. This constellation is only about a 2% increase in damage from his Constellation 4, so not very big. Xingqiu's 6th and final constellation is a massive one and by far his best. This constellation makes every 3rd wave of Xingqiu's burst greatly enhanced and restores 3 energy to him. The description of Xingqiu's Constellation 6 is honestly pretty lacking, so let's go into what it really means. Before Constellation 6, Xingqiu's burst fires off 2 swords, then 3, then 2 again. This constellation makes his burst shoot 2 swords, then 3, then 5. This increases the maximum number of hydro swords that can be fired off to 60 instead of the previous 45 at Constellation 2 or 37 at Constellation 0. This makes Xingqiu's Constellation 6 a huge damage and hydro application increase, but it gets even better. The energy refunded by this constellation drastically lowers the amount of energy recharge Xingqiu needs, and it allows him to more easily use different weapons or artifacts. His final constellation is a whopping 45% DPS increase from his previous constellation and a 125% overall damage increase from Xingqiu at C0. While Xingqiu's constellations are great, honestly 1 copy of him is enough. I recommend going for his constellations eventually since he is in the Star Glitter shop in March and September, and if you want to go for his constellations but don't have a lot of primos or luck on any rate up banners, his Constellation 2 or Constellation 3 are great stopping points before the massive boost at Constellation 6. Next we'll go over Xingqiu's best weapons. The Primordial Jade Cutter is Xingqiu's best 5-star gacha weapon. It provides high crit rate and converts his HP into attack, which is very helpful since Xingqiu usually runs in energy recharge sands. Just under the Jade Cutter we have the Mist Splitter Reforged. This weapon is a huge stat stick with massive crit damage and base attack, but you're really only getting 1 stack of its elemental damage increase passive out of a possible 3 total. It is possible to play Xingqiu on field to get the other 2 stacks, but that's really only worth it if you plan to use Xingqiu as a main DPS and not as a super powerful off-field damage dealer. The next weapon on the list is the Haran Gappaku Futsu. This is another stat stick for Xingqiu, offering a good base attack and high crit rate. The first part of the passive of the sword is great, but like the Mist Splitter, the second part of the passive is useless unless you play Xingqiu as an on-field damage dealer. The best standard banner 5-star weapon for Xingqiu is the Skyward Blade. The high base attack and energy recharge substats are very welcome on Xingqiu, and the minor crit rate it provides is also welcome too. Next we'll move on to the best 4-star weapons for Xingqiu. His best Battle Pass weapon is the Wolf Fang. It provides crit rate as a substat and increases elemental skill and elemental burst damage, and using your skill and burst will each increase your crit rate once again. An R5 Wolffang does about as much DPS as an R1 Skyward Blade, while an R1 is a little bit lower. Unfortunately, this weapon does not help Xingqiu with his energy recharge needs, so you will still need a lot of energy recharge percent from your artifacts. The next weapon on the list is the Sacrificial Sword, one of Xingqiu's best 4-star weapons as it helps him massively with his energy need. But being able to use your skill a second time can extend your rotations, and unless it's refinement level 3 or higher, the passive becomes inconsistent, and the passive's cooldown is longer than Xingqiu's skill. So while the Sacrificial Sword is a great option, you definitely want to have one that's Refinement 3 or greater on Xingqiu, as there is a massive difference between a Refinement level 1 or 2 Sacrificial Sword and a Refinement level 3 or greater Sacrificial Sword. Next up on the 4-star weapons is the Favonius Sword, and this is similar to the Sacrificial Sword as they both have the same base attack and energy recharge percent substats. However, the Favonius Sword is a much better option if you don't have a Refinement level 3 or greater Sacrificial Sword. You can also more easily proc this weapon's passive effect, even if you have to throw in a few normal attacks. And the extra energy particles it generates is beneficial to the entire team. The next weapon on the list is the Fluvsan Ferryman, and Xingqiu's best free-to-play weapon, despite it being a little bit inelegant. The weapon and its refinement materials are obtained by fishing in Fontaine and turning in certain fish to an NPC. But for anyone who's fished for the catch and dreading the thought of that, this weapon is much less annoying to obtain. The energy recharge this weapon provides in its substat and through its passive is the main reason why it's Xingqiu's best free-to-play weapon choice. And the increased crit rate on his elemental skill is nice, but not really that impactful. My overall recommendations for Xingqiu's weapons are to either use a Favonius Sword or a Sacrificial Sword at Refinement 3 or higher. Xingqiu's biggest downfall is the fact that he needs a lot of energy recharge, and these swords give him just that. And the Favonius and Sacrificial Swords passives can also be incredibly helpful. And while you can squeeze out a bit more damage by going for a 5-star weapon for Xingqiu, he really doesn't need it. If you don't have a Favonius Sword or a Sacrificial Sword at Refinement 3 or higher, the Fluvsan Ferryman is a great free-to-play option that is honestly not too far behind Xingqiu's preferred 5-star weapons. Next, we move on to artifacts, and the best artifact set hands down for Xingqiu is the Emblem of the Severed Fate set. The 2-piece set bonus increases his energy recharge by 20%, and the 4-piece increases the damage of his elemental burst the more energy recharge you have. This not only helps solve one of Xingqiu's problems, but it turns a potential weakness that he has into a strength, as the 4-piece set bonus allows building more energy recharge to now directly contribute to Xingqiu's best ability, his elemental burst, to also deal more damage. If you don't have a good 4-piece Emblem of the Severed Fate artifact set, you can give him a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige set, or any combination of a 2-piece set that gives you some amount of energy recharge, hydro damage percent, burst damage percent, or attack percent as the set bonuses. However, it is worth farming for a good 4-piece Emblem of the Severed Fate set because it is Xingqiu's best set overall, and it's also very helpful for a lot of other characters, and other artifact options for him are about 12% worse comparatively. But if you're under Adventure Rank 45 and wondering what to give Xingqiu, a 2-piece Exiles and 2-piece Scholar set is perfect for him. For artifact stat priorities, you'll want Hydro Damage bonus on the Goblet. This not only increases his personal damage, but it also reduces the damage you receive thanks to his Rain Sword's passive ability. You'll want either a crit rate or a crit damage circlet, whichever one you need more of. Ideally, you want to have at least a 50% crit rate, especially if you're using a Favonius Sword. And you'll want an energy recharge Sands. If you do get enough energy recharge from your weapon and substats, then you can use an attack percent Sands on Xingqiu instead. For overall stat priorities, energy recharge is the most important stat for Xingqiu. He needs to burst every single rotation, and depending on your team and how you play him, his energy recharge needs can vary greatly. If he's the only Hydro character on the team, then his energy recharge needs can easily be over 280%. I know this sounds ridiculous, but with an energy recharge Sands and using your skill before your burst with the Fluvsan Ferryman sword, you can get about 230% energy recharge, and that's without counting any energy recharge substats on your artifacts. If you use a Favonius sword, his energy recharge requirements drop to about 240%, so with an energy recharge Sands and the substats from the Favonius sword, at level 90 he only needs about 20% energy recharge from artifact substats, which is quite doable. If you have a sacrificial sword at refinement 3 or higher, he only needs 190% energy recharge. This means that when you have a level 90 sacrificial sword, you only need about 30% energy recharge from all of your artifact stats, which is totally possible to get from artifact substats alone, allowing you to use an attack percent sands on Xingqiu instead of an energy recharge sands. And if you're using a character other than Xingqiu with a Favonius weapon on the team, Xingqiu's energy recharge requirements decrease by a further 20% or more across the board. This is one of the main reasons why Favonius weapons are broken, especially when 2 or more characters on your team have them. If your Xingqiu is Constellation 6, his energy recharge requirements drop by about 40% across the board, allowing you to more easily run an attack percent sands for more damage while still being able to burst every single rotation. Now that we've thoroughly covered Xingqiu's kit and how to build him, let's look at his strengths and weaknesses and where you can best use him. As far as strengths go, Xingqiu's damage in single target is quite high, despite the fact that he has to give up a lot of attack for energy recharge. He provides tons of hydro off-field application, which is extremely useful for tons of teams. In addition to his offensive abilities, he also makes gameplay more comfortable through providing damage reduction, interruption resistance, and modest amounts of healing. Xingqiu can play in almost any team and is highly in demand for some of the best characters in the game. Xingqiu is very powerful at Constellation 0, but he also has really great constellations that make him even better. Xingqiu scales very well at endgame and is super viable for harder content even with low investment. Xingqiu is very free-to-play friendly as he slots well into so many different teams and has good free-to-play 4-star weapon options. And even if you aren't lucky enough to get him from Wishing, you can always guarantee a copy of him during Lantern Rite or in the Star Glitter shop in the months of March and September. Despite all the great things about Xingqiu, he is far from perfect. His 80 cost energy burst makes him quite an energy hungry character, meaning you really have to sacrifice some offensive capability to really use him well. Xingqiu can be difficult to use in the early game because it's very hard to get enough energy recharge to let him use his burst off cooldown when your artifact quality is not very good. Xingqiu does have high stat requirements and he can be difficult to build without constellations. His skill also has a very long cooldown and it feels extra bad if you miss his skill because you're a shark and you have poor depth perception. Xingqiu does great in single target fights, but he is a lot more limited in fights with lots of enemies. Next we'll move on to Xingqiu's best teams, and there are a lot of them. Since he is such a universally desired character thanks to his off-field hydro application and damage, tons of teams and characters will benefit from being paired with Xingqiu. One of his most famous teams is the National Team, which consists of Xingqiu, Xiangling, and Bennett, and just about anyone else in the final slot. Xiangling and Xingqiu can do tons of vaporized damage off-field, while Bennett can buff the entire team's attack to an absurd amount while also healing them, and the other character basically does whatever they want on this team. This team is absurdly strong with just 3 members, but it's even better when you add a character like Raiden, Kazuha, or Sucrose. Xingqiu is also known as one of the best supports for pyro characters in the game because he can make consistent vaporize reactions with just about any of them. In these teams, you'll run Xingqiu with any on-field pyro damage dealer like Yanfei, Klee, Diluc, Yoimiya, or Hu Tao. The other 2 characters you run are flex spots and can be characters that provide off-field damage, team buffs, or survivability buffs. There's only a few pyro damage dealers that Xingqiu does not pair well with, and those are Amber, Linny, Dea, and Xinyan. Another extremely strong team comp for Xingqiu is using him with an Electro character and a Dendro character. If you like green, blue, and purple, this is a great team for you because there will be so many different elemental reactions going off all the time that you will see a lot of those colors. There's actually quite a bit of variation for these teams, and if you want to know which one might be best for you, you can come by and check me out on Twitch. I stream daily, and if you have questions about team setups, I'd be happy to answer them for you. If this type of team sounds appealing, you can run a very free-to-play friendly version with Lisa, the Dendro Traveler, and Xingqiu, and if you wanted a little bit stronger team with a few more limited characters, you could use Nahida, Xingqiu, and Kuki Shinobu. Beyond that, Xingqiu works very well with cryo characters for freeze teams. The off-field hydro application from Xingqiu's elemental burst plus the cryo application from your cryo characters will keep enemies frozen pretty much permanently. Xingqiu can also work great if you want a second hydro character on a team such as a Yulan Xingqiu team or an Ayato Xingqiu team just for even more hydro application, and with his Constellation 2 he's increasing the hydro damage for your other characters as well. This also means that Xingqiu does extremely well in a Hydro Mono Element team, using 3 Hydro characters and 1 Anemo character with a Viridescent artifact set to shred the enemy's Hydro resistance. But beyond all the reaction and Hydro damage teams, Xingqiu can be a great choice for the sheer amount of utility he provides. Because he provides so many other things instead of just off-field damage and hydro application, if you have a team that could use interruption resistance, damage reduction, or modest healing, Xingqiu makes a great addition. Especially when he's equipped with a Favonius sword, so he can generate a few extra particles every few seconds and help reduce your team's energy recharge requirements. Overall, Xingqiu is one of the best characters in the game, and yes, I am including 5 stars in that list. He's incredibly versatile while also bringing lots of offensive and defensive utility. Hoyo will never make a 4-star as good as him again, so he's definitely worth building once you get him. If you can manage to meet his high energy recharge requirements, you'll have a character that you can use forever in Genshin Impact. I hope this guide was helpful. Make sure to like the video and let me know in the comments below who you'd like to see me make a guide on next. I love you all, stay jawsome, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.